Okay, I think we'll get started. Actually, the first question is his. So maybe we'll wait. We'll just move this one down, and when he joins, put it over here. So there was a conversation on GitHub about the relationship between gateway class and gateway, and I think Harry, you were the one commenting the most, or at the beginning, and then Nick, I know you had some comments as well. I had some replies to that, but I wanted kind of maybe since on the call we could just kind of describe the situation and we can discuss it.
You want to go first, Harry? You there?
Uh-oh, I saw him. Oh, he's right there.
Sorry, I just dropped. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about gateway class, right? Not ingress class. I'm so mixed up between V1 and.
Oh yeah. Sorry, gateway class. Yeah. Me too.
So gateway class seems very similar to ingress class, but we are doing a redirection for some reason, right? Like the current example we have, it's not super clear, but we have gateway class which we want to all the ingress controllers to follow, or we have some common gateway classes, but then we have the vendor specific configuration inside the gateway class. But then that renders the question where, if you have the gateway class of internet, there can be only one provider, right? You cannot have two controllers implementing the same gateway class because that name is unique.
Right. So, before I respond, Nick.
Yeah. I think my attempt was sort of basically my comment was just me writing through what I thought about it to try and sort out things in my head as well. I see what you're saying, Harry, and I think that maybe the docs have inadvertently sort of made that a bigger deal than it is. I think Bowie will the way that Bowie you explained it in your later comment, Bowie is very clear, and we probably should just almost lift that and put it in the docs. But I think the important part is that the name is only relevant as the thing that you put in the gateway. And so just having well-known names means that you can obscure the details of which controller is the one that's actually implementing the gateway for you. And the having well-known names is just about saying, hey, cloud provider X is going to install one called internet. If you make your gateways using the internet gateway class, then you'll get internet, right? Like you don't need to worry about how we do it. And then the idea, so for me as a ingress controller maintainer of Contour, I will supply one that's like the Contour ingress class, and that a Contour gateway class that has the config that has some config for Contour. And if you want to use Contour, you could set your gateways to the Contour gateway class. Right? And then the only reason to have the well-known names is just to make it so that if you only want to have one ingress controller in your cluster, you set up that ingress controller to use the internet gateway class, and the gateway defaults its class setting to internet, and then that means that the user doesn't need to specify the gateway. By default it's internet. If you set up the internet one, then you don't have to specify it. That mimics the current behavior of the ingress, where if you don't specify an ingress class, then and there's only one ingress controller running, then it can just pick up anything.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. So basically, the way it's probably written from the point of view of the administrator, and probably unnecessarily begins like that. But if you take it from what exists today, basically all the different ingress controllers, like Nginx, HA, maybe some cloud like AWS or something, they each have that string that basically tells like, oh yeah, this configuration is only managed by that controller. It's basically the same thing. We're just making it like a resource Now, where the sort of the choice of naming comes up is that if you, as sort of an infrastructure provider, wanted to hide that implementation detail from your users, then that allows you to do so. We would probably expect for most ordinary users who just download things off the shelf that it would continue to be that Nginx instantiates an Nginx ingress class, Kong instantiates a Kong ingress class, and so forth. But where there's a use case is, for example, we have GKE clusters, Kubernetes clusters across different environments. And if we wanted to say, hey, user, like, it doesn't matter which environment you're on, you want to create an internet-facing proxy, and we'll have a bit of more of an interaction around that. So you don't have to necessarily know, oh, I'm in this cloud provider in this specific thing. It's more like if you have you're offering the platform, and that's where that person will be sort of rewriting ingress classes to their end.
Is it true to say that this makes gateway instances more portable in that regard?
Yeah, like the ideal case is like let's say you are a provider that manages multiple platforms. You don't have to necessarily then tell the user, oh yeah, and on this side you're using Nginx, but on this side you're using AWS, on this side you're using Azure to reach the internet.
If I can say, if you're a packager, so you have Helm with the generic stuff that can be installed on any platform, you probably want to not hard code a specific platform because it will not work. So you probably would put internet or internal load balancer or kind of a generic name instead of the single default that we have today. With the old ingress, you can either put a default, which is whatever it is, but you cannot specify it's internet-based or internal. So
yeah,
I think it's a good idea to keep the aliases.
Yeah, the other thing about the infrastructure that this captures is, let's say you set up, even for, let's say you're using off-the-shelf proxy software and you're doing, let's say you have like 3 instances, but they have different networking configuration. Maybe one of them has a leg and some VPN, and so like it gives the admin the freedom to do so. I think for a lot of the self-service folks who will be installing things and not configuring it significantly, they probably will stick with the stock names that come from the provider.
Can I just drill down on that for a second? It sounds to me as though there's 2 separate concerns. There's the concern about which ingress controller will get these gateway class, and then there's the concern about what are the policy semantics of the gateway class. I don't think vendors can really say anything about the latter. So if we're going to go around, if we're going to say there are well-known names like internet, it seems like that's going down the path of having a registry and trying to nail down some common semantics around that well-known name.
Now this is where I get into trouble for putting speculative notes in there. So if you notice in the doc, it's like, it may be that well-known names become established, but we should just delete that. I mean, was just like a...
Yeah. So I think for the vendor case, at least, you would say, well, your name is your ingress implementation, and that's probably the most that you could shift by default.
That's right. I'm more thinking from the infrastructure provider standpoint that they may standardize across the different platforms that they support if they support heterogeneous platforms. I'll make that explicit.
It makes total sense from an infrastructure or an operator point of view.
Yeah, I agree, but I think you're right, Bowie. Having that in there now is kind of confusing when a lot of the people who are going to be looking at this now are thinking about it, from how do I take my ingress V1 ideas and turn them into ingress, into this thing.
Yes,
I think it's fine. It just needs a bit of clarification of the different use cases.
Yeah, that definitely. And then I think the example we just sketched probably would clarify it a lot. So I think I'll add it to the concepts. And then, Harry, do you have any thoughts?
No, I totally get it. So I think that's pretty fair. Like, I think the way like gateway class is supposed to work is pretty nice. It's just a question of defining some standard behaviors. I don't know if you want to define that or not. So that multiple ingress controllers, which are by proxy vendors, operate in a similar fashion, or sort of similar expected way, rather than each doing a very different thing. So it makes clear sense from a cloud provider perspective. And now I'm reading your comments in that PR, and that makes it pretty clear. So maybe I'll open up PR to document that better. So
Yeah, I'll try to, given the previous conversation just now, I'll try to change the concepts to capture that, and then let's just continue commenting on the PR, see if that clears things up or there are more things to talk about.
yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, this conversation clears it up quite a bit. So.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts from anyone else on that topic?
I mean, I think that it feels to me like the best TLDR you can give is that gateway class is the new way to do ingress class with some extra bits, with some extra goodness added on, right? Like, that's if you're just talking about translating from the old to the new, that's that's sort of the sentence that you need to tell people that they can be like, oh, okay, that's what I need. That gets me past, what is this gateway class thing?
That's right. Okay, so we'll definitely add that. Anyone else? Okay, so the next topic is, what is the process for reviewing, iterating, accepting, denying a use case? I think last meeting, we didn't have that many use cases. I see quite a few popping up now and populating it. We'll probably schedule either next meeting or next meeting to, as a group, go over the list of use cases. At that time, it probably would be too early because the list was too short. But we should definitely, as a group, kind of discuss the use cases and sort of prioritize them.
Let me.
Sorry. Hello? Was that Danian? Hello? Okay.
No, not me. I'm listening, so that sounds good. I mean, one thought I did have was actually translating the use cases into, GitHub issues, and maybe having, creating a specific tag called use cases or something like that, so we can manage them over time. But I guess my only concern with having a meeting is I can see how we can go down some.
That's true.
Some rabbit holes, and I mean, what do we have? A dozen use cases now. I could see those conversations going on and on and on. And so there's just the one thought that came to my mind was, porting over to GitHub issues and continuing the conversation there.
Yeah.
By no means is that the complete solution. I still think we need, to get to a point where we say, okay, thumbs up or thumbs down on this use case or what have you.
Yeah, that's a good point. When we transition to GitHub, I think GitHub UI is leaps and bounds from where it was like 4 years ago. So we can play around with that, and that definitely sounds useful because then you can have the actual comment trail, and we can tag it. So let's see. I have to take a look at that doc to see how many have accumulated, but I think generally, if we have a backlog of use cases and we just make the translation, that would be useful. So let's take a note of that to see what that would look like. And if you want to propose like how the GitHub issue would be structured, then by all means, create an issue as to how to the meta issue.
An issue for an issue. Yeah, let me look into that some more, Bowie. I'll take that as a to-do.
Okay.
Yeah, like that's a good case. That's a good case for an issue template that just is, a use case or something.
Right. That's exactly kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more comments on that topic? I think we'll take this to GitHub, the GitHub meta issue.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my mic was not working before. This is about the previous topic. We were saying that the gateway class makes it potentially that your gateway is portable. How will that work though with the extensions? Like, I'd imagine that you load up your gateway with all these custom extensions for some gateway class, and then now this generic gateway class is no longer as portable as we once wanted it to be.
That's inevitable. If you don't go into the extensions, then it will be portable. But if you go into the extensions, the understanding is then it's up to you. And I think I've seen users kind of stay within the portable subset, and I've also seen users go into the non-portable. But at least they have somewhat of a choice, and it's one that we can almost even statically check. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And I think it feels like, sorry, I'm going to make a note of myself, that a good place, that would be a good place to have a comment on that extensions field, Bowie, to say, the point of this is to make it so you don't need arbitrary annotations to add extra stuff here. This is the arbitrary annotation section for this new thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, in terms of a lot of the people who are going to be reading this document, like this documentation, are going to be, how do I take my V1 things and turn them into V2? And so, having more things that explains that to people will make it quick for people to pick things up.
Yeah, at some point, I expect that we might split that doc into one that faces users versus the controller authors. Right now, it's we don't have that much content, so it's going to be just one, but that's a good idea. Especially the Ingress V1 authors, which I know there's quite a few. So that's definitely a user group that we need to target. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so what we had on the schedule, how much time do we have left?
We're till 25 minutes.
Okay, we'll just go as much as we can. So this might take a while, and this might spill over to the next meeting. So I'm going to go over what we currently have in the gateway. We kind of discussed relationship with gateway class. This is just to set the general context, and then people will just go to opens. And I know Dan Mace has a interesting discussion section here. And my thought is, from the previous meeting, is it probably worthwhile that, we have all the discussion, and then we have a bunch of notes, and then from the notes, I think it's worthwhile taking the major issues and filing the GitHub issues to track it, and then we can continue the conversation there. That seems to be a reasonable way to continue kind of commenting without like having it all inside a Google Doc and then kind of bifurcating it somewhere else. How do you guys feel about that?
I think that's great. Moving into GitHub issues means that it's easier to be asynchronous.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just going over to Gateway. Oh dear. What's that?
This has not been covered yet.
I was going to go over Gateway
Okay.
first.
Okay.
And then do
Yes,
that.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the idea, let's see, the idea of, we can go through. Okay, so the idea of the gateway is basically, it is the one-to-one life cycle of a given load balancer. So right now, when you create an ingress, in a lot of infrastructures, I think all infrastructures, it ends up taking some action. For example, in cloud, it will instantiate a bunch of resources. In the proxy providers, it will cause configuration to be generated and reloaded into the load balancer. The same thing will be true for the gateway. The gateway is the sort of one-to-one with the lifecycle. It links to a particular gateway class. And then it also holds sort of the termination parameters, for example, the protocol termination, TLS, and it also maps to the set of routes that then map to the service. So, and the intention of separating gateway from, say, the routing is to support the personas where we can have separate control over creation of gateways versus routes. If you have an infrastructure where you have a team that manages network access, then you kind of are able to give them their own resources to deal with, and then they can control how application developers link into those gateways. Now, if we look at what's currently in the gateway type, we have basically in gateway, sorry, can people see this? I'll expand this quite a bit.
Yes, we can see.
Good.
Yeah, you can follow along at home because this is on GitHub. So you have gateway spec, and it consists of the class that references, I think we've talked about this, and then basically what is the termination? So, what ports are open, protocols and so forth, what address, and then the set of routes that are associated with the gateway. Now, by the way, I know that there's a lot of comments as to should the routes be a selector and so forth, which we can get to. So the listener is going to be your pretty standard listener definition. There's the address that you potentially could bind to. This is to support, for example, asking for a particular address, which is possible in cloud providers and certain proxy providers, but it's an optional field. The port on which it's bound, the protocol which to use, and this one has very interesting implications even across, there's an app protocols proposal in Kubernetes networking, so we have to discuss this in detail, what would go here. And then one very common protocol would be TLS, and it's called out here explicitly just because it's so common, right? You could conceivably put TLS in some extension thing, but it's just, everyone's going to be using this thing. And then finally, this is an example of a proposal for how you would extend listeners. You would basically be able to add an extension here that's provider specific. Now, in terms of the routes, where's this here? The routes, this is just a list of type local. It shouldn't be a type local, it should be an object reference. Basically, these are the set of routes that we can link to. And now going into TLS, this is sort of like a mix of what is in ingress and then what we see as basically standard across providers. So certificates is something that was in ingress. And again, we should figure out whether this is the scope of the references. And then there are some things that seem to be part of every single implementation, which is some parameterization around how TLS is configured, such as minimum version. And then there is lots of things that people do configure today, which is like which cipher suite you use and restrictions and so forth. I don't think gateway status is overall needs to be defined, but basically you're going to have to talk about all your listeners that you've tried to configure and all the routes that you've configured. That's like a general high level of where the API stands today. And I see any questions on that? I think it's yes. Go ahead.
So with the status for the gateway, it feels to me like the status for the specific listeners and stuff is a good spot for condition style thing rather than the specific error we've got there. That's all. I just wanted to note that.
Oh yeah. That was before I reviewed the API conventions endlessly to make sure I was in compliance.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no worries.
Yeah. We should record that. Yeah. That's like what you do as a C++ programmer, and then you try to write Kubernetes APIs. The enum. So I think the first item here is Dan Mace had a question about TLS support. So Dan, you want to talk about that one?
Sure. If you could elaborate a little maybe on the more specific semantics that are implied by the certificates field of TLS scope to the gateway listener, that would be good. So I guess that, the one implication seems to be that TLS is terminating at the gateway in this case, right?
Yes.
And then I would ask then that set of certificates, like for what set of routes are those certificates valid?
Yeah, I think this one is, we should go and try to sketch out some of the use cases. Most of the behavior, I'm assuming, is we're just going to bring over from the old ingress, just because that's a known model that we're working with. But we should definitely explore whether there are more different models. You know what? This is a little bit different than ingress, because I think ingress has a set of host names as well, along with the certificates, which is, I'm not sure who actually uses that. Can anyone speak to if they use the host names?
Contour uses the host names to determine, to do a host header checking to make sure that the host header matches up with the certificate matches up, and so the SNI will work.
So how did the user of the route owns that certificate? How did they? So in the current one, sorry, some of the ideas here are taken from some of the stuff we've done in Contour. I think the way that in Contour that we do it is we have a slightly similar idea to
to the gateway in that we have, for our custom types, we have a distinction between a route, one of those, and one that gets imported. So that's analogous to between a gateway and a route. The only place where TLS config can live is in a route. And so a route defines a domain name that the thing is serving and any associated TLS that goes with that. And then hooks out to routes after that. But so you can't, so that means that the domain name and TLS config is like a top level thing that you then sort of, the routes are then like sub objects that specify routes based on various conditions. Like most of the time it's path, but it can be headers and stuff like that as well. I'm not sure how well that maps here, Bowie. But yeah, that's.
Does this? Let me ask one more question. Does the API we have here now, as it stands, imply that the end user of the route coordinated with the admin to allow their certificate to be referenced by the gateway?
Yes, placing it in the gateway puts into the domain of the network like that middle persona that we have.
Cluster ops.
Yes, cluster ops. So
specific owners are cluster ops operators is the key part there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the use case. Yeah. Okay. So the use case that I have in mind, which I think is not satisfied there, is that it is where the owner of the route is able to specify that certificate without admin intervention.
Or just everything.
Yeah. So
we should still support this. No.
So there's an interesting thing here is that in that case, wouldn't you just want that person to create their own gateways?
Yeah, you don't have to only have one gateway. You can create as many gateways as you have, like load balancers, or in this case, domain names, or like a load balancer in this, like a gateway can imply either the creation of like some physical thing, or it can imply like this is a domain name that you're going to serve out of a single load balancer, like Contour.
But this is expensive. Sorry, this is expensive because the main problem is IP allocation. Every IP, if you have multiple regions, you need to create one IP for each gateway. And so usually most people use SNI and dispatch based on SNI.
Yeah, I think, so for instance, one of the potential implementation ways to implement class is actually have, if you look in the concepts, it says what kind of deployments this can map to. And one of the ways to deploy it is a merged gateway class. And this is actually what Nginx ingress class does, is that actually you have like 10 or 20 ingresses, but they all kind of get merged together and share one IP. Now it's up to the implementation to kind of figure out how conflicts will be resolved, because clearly you can get into conflicts. But if you're going to share, then one of the ways to do it is to have each give permission on this particular kind of gateway, but not necessarily make it so that you just rely on route to kind of stick the TLS certificate in there. So I would like to record.
One of the values of the new APIs was that developer, right, the HTTP route or whatever the routes are kind of the interface for developers. And so now we're saying, well, if you have a TLS route, the workaround is also go ahead and create the gateway. And now that developer is not only acting as a developer persona, they're acting as a cluster ops persona. As opposed to saying, okay, the responsibilities of a developer is not only creating the host and the path, but is if this is a HTTPS route, adding your certificate as well, right? And so the certificates field, and I think I reflect this in PR of one of the use cases I created was, the certificate field of a gateway is just kind of a default certificate that the gateway uses if an HTTP route doesn't specify a TLS config.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Yes. That's right.
That has a question of ownership also, because you have multiple namespaces, each of them can create routes. How do you decide if a namespace has access to the foo.com certificate, or if it's allowed to?
So the way that we've handled that in Contour is to have that distinction between a root and a non-root one. And so the root ones are the ones that have the TLS details. We actually have like a separate TLS delegation thing that you can use as well. But making it so that there's something, if you are an owner of a TLS certificate, then you have different permissions than just someone who is owning the actual routing of the request once the TLS is terminated.
Yeah.
Those are two different things, and like, you know, although sometimes you might have developers who do that, other people are going to not want to let their developers do that, and so conflating them all the time is an error, I think.
Yeah, I think this is. Sorry, I think like this is one place where let's write down the use case, and then it won't map very cleanly to resources because we have use cases on both sides. Like if we make a decision to push it down, then you have issues when you merge up. If you leave it in the higher one, then you have issues when you're trying to delegate. Now, there's a couple of options to go. One is to give the user the ability to create the gateways. The other one is to explore some kind of delegation in terms of pushing down. I would like to sort of lay all those things out. I think we can get to an answer that will satisfy the use cases. I don't think we necessarily need to lock up the use cases, but it's worth exploring like all the different potential ways we can describe it and how they map to RBAC essentially. And I think RBAC may not be entirely sufficient for this kind of permissions model that we may want to do. So there might be we might have to describe it further than RBAC, but it will be, yeah, we should look at all the different structures that could come out of this.
So we did kind of get a use case going. I think it's, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, like user specified certs, but it's in the use case doc. And as I mentioned too, I linked it to a PR just so everyone can start to kind of visualize what it would look like within the Go types. Question, Nick, is I'm interested in understanding a little bit more of how you're talking about like a high level route, or I can't explain it because I'm still trying to comprehend it. Do you have maybe like a link to some documentation that you can post in the notes here so we can look at it in more detail?
I'll put a link to the Contour our CRD ones, which sort of explains how our CRD works. So some of, obviously having worked a lot on that, like my mental model is strongly influenced by that, right? So, you know, maybe I'm wrong coming from there, but that's sort of, because we've been doing this sort of, you know, like parceling out control of things for a little while, we've sort of run across a couple of problems and ended up solving them in this certain way. You know, I think one of the risks of allowing the certs to flow, to be imported from lower down, is that then you've got to have pretty strong controls about making sure that, you know, Johnny McDeveloper can't accidentally overwrite the main TLS cert for someone else, if you see what I'm saying. And that can be tricky to do, and so that's one of the reasons why we've done it that way. I'll find that link now and put it in the notes.
And it also makes it difficult to have a namespace, multiple namespaces implementing the same domain, because then which domain has a certificate? So I agree that's probably the best domain, the best API. One concern I have is to have a clear requirement about this kind of stuff. I mean, it should be possible to secure the ingress so that TLS certificates are not available to all namespaces, and it is controlled who has access to a namespace, to a certificate. We had quite a few problems with that.
Yeah, Costin, it would be great to kind of either dump it in the notes or put it in the use cases doc to see what the problems were, because we definitely want to be cognizant of them.
But I think Contour has pretty similar, and their APIs, it's expressing pretty much what we need as well.
Right. So if you can look at the use cases.
I'll do that.
Yeah. And Daniel, I'll look at your PR and see how it understand your use case as well.
Thanks. So I think maybe one way to look at look at the discussion that we just had is that the API proposal doesn't seem to have a really clear, well-defined concept of a virtual host. So you have some of the responsibilities of what people think of as a vhost fall into gateway, and others fall in the HTTP route. So maybe, I don't know how those responsibilities will pass it up, but maybe it makes sense to have something which is more conceptually defined as a vhost.
That's an interesting suggestion. Yeah, so part of that would be pushing, well, what parts of the vhost, what is in your mind in a virtual host?
To my mind, a virtual host is a host name and the associated set of things which are strongly associated with that host name. And I think certificates are a part of that. Originally, I had assumed that Gateway was a vhost, but I just went and checked the doc based on this discussion, and I hadn't noticed before that the host matching was part of HTTP route. My mental model was always that, oh, Gateway is a vhost. That was completely wrong.
Interesting.
Yeah, as was mine.
Yeah, I think that's worth exploring. We're still at a stage where we can push fields up and down, so it's good. It's not
So
published.
a lot of proxies do have the vhost concept, but not all of them. I mean, Apache, HTTPD, Nginx, and Envoy all have a pretty close approximation of a vhost. Traffic server doesn't. I'm not that familiar with HA proxy.
And given that SNI matching happens before any routing and parsing of HTTP, it's probably confusing for a lot of people that TLS is bound to routes, because in reality you cannot do anything except do a SNI match first.
Right.
So I agree, but top level concept for domain name will be quite useful.
Interesting. So pushing it up into Gateway.
Yeah, and having the other thing that it allows for is if you want to use SNI for routing the request without actually terminating TLS, you also need to have it. You would need to have it at the routing at the gateway level or at the load balancer level, very high up.
It's a good point.
I know Contour supports that. I don't know about other ones, but if you want to be able to fit that use case, then you need to have
Istio does too as well, and it's pretty good. So,
I think that would be equivalent, yeah. OpenShift has the OpenShift Route API as a pass-through mode that I think is the same as what you're describing.
Okay. I think, yeah, so let's take it. Would that PR be a useful place for the comments to go? Or should we create a Uber issue? I think it might be worth creating just an Uber issue to dump everything and link the PR from there.
Yeah.
Just a quick one, TCP also will benefit from that because you can also have SNI at TCP level and do dispatching even if it's not HTTP.
You mean TLS, not TCP?
Yeah, well, TCP over TLS, so not non-HTTPS, just the plain TCP over TLS.
Right.
Because in this case, a domain name would be used in SNI and can be used for routing and further.
You mean a stream of bytes over TLS?
Yes.
You could do DTLS. Anyways, okay. So I think we'll open an issue with that, with the stuff captured from the notes, and then we can continue the conversation there.
And my notes fell behind there, so feel free to add your own perspectives there or anywhere else. I'm doing a bad job at paraphrasing people here. So
no, you're doing a great job. Okay, so let's see. Dan Mace. So day in the life of HTTPS request. I think lots of this may come out of that. So maybe we should just wait for more conversation on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I just wanted to call it out. I think it'd be helpful. I don't know how others feel, but as I'm trying to develop a mental model of how this stuff works, when we've had internal discussions, we're always trying to figure out, okay, the day in the life of a request coming in, how does this all work together? So yeah, it could just be like a docs PR that we need to create when we lock this stuff down a little more.
Yeah, I think yeah, let's I would really want to kind of get some progress on that issue that we're going to file, and then I think we can sketch out one, or maybe as part of discussing that, we can kind of sketch out what we think. I do also want to capture in that issue the various permissions models that and securing of resources that we kind of want to understand and just explicitly lay it out there. I don't think the current code or concepts has explicit sort of references to how that would work.
It does not. No,
Any other comments on TLS? I know TLS was gonna be a spicy topic, and virtual hosts. So let's see. So one of the things that I think I'll also file an issue for. Are we close at time?
We are at time.
Oh, we are at time. Okay, sorry. So we'll save this for agenda next time. Is probably going to start using the GitHub project board, and as like these things get more concrete and we understand which pieces need to be done. And actually, I was thinking that in this repo there will be the performance tests. There'll be basically common util libraries that will make it easy to build controllers on the API, and then the validation and sort of like the testing and stuff. So those are things that as these things get more and more concrete, we can start filing issues to actually get code done, and then we'll use those project boards for tracking. And I think since we're at time, that's about it. Any other opens?
I just wanted to note, I have started the effort to make Contour ready to consume these APIs. So I'm hoping that as we get to something that that's consumable, then I should be able to have something tryable there pretty quickly.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
If you guys hadn't named it Gateway, we would have it as well, but our code is all looking up by the type name, and we already have a gateway, so everything blew up.
Sorry, not sorry. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for showing up. I hope the recording worked. Otherwise, we're going to have to refer to notes, and that will be resolved next week. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Bowie.